Okay, so our next speaker is Andrew Arruda. I will just make it short. I'll give you two guesses who he works with. Andrew is a guy who I think is very also emblematic of what's going on. You know, people under 30, it used to be law was very much hierarchical. You had to sort of wait your turn. I think Andrew just shows you, and Laura and other people like that around the world, you know, who really have the smarts and have the guts, you know, to step up and really contribute, and they're making a huge impact in terms of the delivery of legal systems services. So hats off to the younger generation who are clearly starting to play a huge role. Without further ado, I'll just say that Andrew is a co-founder and CEO of Ross. He's going to talk to us, I'm sure, about what he's doing. He may yet give one more shout out to Toronto, which is well deserved. Andrew's moderator is a person on our law faculty, Sarah. And Sarah, I'm sure, is going to ask Andrew some probing questions.
I actually think we're on the same page, so.
Stay tuned.
Okay. Anyway, without further ado, Andrew Arruda.
Thank you, Mark. Mark's always been someone I basically kind of like ships passing in the night on Twitter and whatnot. If I go to an event, that means he was there the day before or he's there the day after. So you are here physically, and I was worried that you weren't.
This is my avatar.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I actually am not really going to be talking about artificial intelligence. I'm actually going to be looking at some other things, and you're going to, I think, enjoy, and I hope you will. If you do enjoy what I'm saying and you're following along on Twitter, I'm at Andrew Arruda. If you don't, it's at Arruda. So, first, before I get started, I want to give a couple shout outs. One to Casey Flaherty. He wrote a piece about something called the Magic Money Machine, and I think you'll note why I'm giving him a shout out on that. And then Alexis Chun, who I actually met in Singapore. She's doing amazing things with legalese. She had just the most incredible visual presentation I've seen done, and it used kind of this highlighting type methods and GIFs. And today is going to be very GIF heavy, so get ready for that. The first thing I want to talk about is a machine that prints money. I mean, I know right now you might think, hey, Andrew, there's no such thing, but we're going to imagine for a moment we've all invented, the great minds in this very room invented a machine that prints money. Prints $10 US bills. You know, let's add a cap to it. It's not infinite, but it's whatever in your head is a good amount of money that anyone would want to own this type of machine. The cost for it is fair. It makes sense to purchase it. It prints money. Now, how would a legal organization go about purchasing this machine? And actually, this is something that I used as a thought experiment because it really helps me understand what the process is at whatever organization I'm at. So I said, you know, ideally, obviously, you know, and I'm going to touch on this, there's no such thing as this machine, but let's pretend we have it. How long would it take? Who's going to be involved in this purchase? And how long from the moment you've seen it and it's proven to purchase will there be? So as I mentioned, I use this as a way to probe into and get you know, these answers to this question because I think it's important. Okay, so obviously the results vary. But the answer to this question is usually a few months, maybe even half a year. And that's for a machine that has been proven to print money. And by way of the thought experiment, it's perfect. And people accept that premise, which I know is a crazy premise to accept. The question is, why is that? Now, I obviously know that the easy answer that anyone would give, well, Andrew, you know, law firms are complex, in-house teams are complex. It's not like they're going to purchase it right then and there. I understand that, and I will totally agree that yes, you know, legal organizations have complex processes. But it seems to me, time and after time, after discussing this very thought experiment with folks from other industries outside of legal, the results that I typically got back were much shorter. The conversations were much clearer in that they'd say, yes, you have to go through these 4 people, this happens, the purchase is made X amount of time, this is the contract, and there's a set process. What it suggested to me is that legal organizations aren't necessarily built to purchase technology. It's not something that we've had to do, and there's been multiple presentations so far which highlighted the fact that there's this new need for technology, whereas in the past we haven't needed it before. There was talk about why do you need product management in law? And that's because we now face a time where there's not as much abundancy of resources. You can't just send out your bill and say for services rendered X amount and get away with that. And so just like anyone who's been in a situation where resources are not as available, you have to start managing what you're doing. So think about, you have water, you're in the desert, all of a sudden it's going to become super important to do that. And technology is playing a role. And again, this presentation isn't going to be all doom and gloom, much like John Fernandez mentioned. I'm an optimist and we're going to get there. But I think instead of us always concentrating on talking about the technology, the benefits of the technology, et cetera, I wanted to spend with everyone here an examination of some of the issues that I continue to see. Now, who here is familiar with the concept of bike shedding? Okay, good. So we'll all learn something today. So the bike shed example is when really intelligent people are asked to make a decision about something that they don't necessarily know anything about. So the example is there's a big nuclear facility that's going to be put up somewhere. It's a very complex nuclear fusion. I don't know enough about it. But they have all these mines, they're sitting around a table, and instead of talking about the safety aspects of the nuclear division, what they end up talking about is where are you going to put the bike shed that's going to store the employees' bikes. And people have a ton of it, that's where they feel comfortable, so that's where they're going to go. They're going to say, hey, well, how many employees do we have? What kind of bikes are they riding? Is it mountain bikes? I don't know. And the decision to make that bike shed decision ends up being much larger because that's what they feel comfortable talking about. So let's go back to that machine. Maybe this is, I think, what generally might happen. Why does it only print $20 bills? I need it to print other things. Well, we always have to try it for free. We need to get sign off from 9 people, but they only meet once every 4 years. And my favorite in the American context is we would definitely purchase if it printed euros. If I showed up in Germany, they might say if it printed USD. And the thing is, and why this is a problem, is because there is no such thing as a magic money machine. Okay? So the question becomes, how do you sell legal technology? Right? How do you? And you can. So again, the situation's not dire. But I do want to go through so that I can benefit the community at large some of the biggest challenges that I see, and a lot of them we've already discussed in this forum over the last day or two. So the first one, obviously, is the billable hour structure. So you're at odds with the fact that you bill by the hour, so the longer it takes you to do a task, the more money you make. And what really is the problem with the billable hour structure is not necessarily the structure itself, but the fact that it really should be named, as long as I can get away with billing you for that, then I will continue to charge you for that. And so, what we're now seeing, which is fabulous, is coming out of 2008, and I do love the Georgetown report, although Marcus did a pretty amazing job using data first and showing how there might be some problems with it. But one thing it shows, which I think is undeniable, is that move away from the billable hour structure to fixed fees, et cetera. So like I said, not all this is grim, but I want to go through each one. This one is massive, the partnership structure, because you're asking individuals to take money out of their pocket today to buy technology that will benefit future generations and cut into their profits. The other issue with this is if you're measuring profit per partner and you're making large-scale R&D payments into technology, that's an issue. So you have to ask yourself, why do these massive law firms, which do billions of dollars in business, not have an R&D department? That's something that every other organization has. So if you can't prepare for your future and pay for your future, you end up getting what you get. This isn't anyone's fault too. A lot of the time, a lot of the challenges you face is it's the first time those organizations are getting out and being innovative. So there is no process in place, so you have to kind of blaze the path and get it done, which again, like I said, is not anyone's fault. This one's a really big one, and this has been mentioned multiple times, and I greedily asked a question on day one about minimum viable products and building from there. The problem is, because of the nature of our work, which is very important and we can't make mistakes, we need our technology to perform at certain levels, which is completely fair. The problem is it becomes kind of a catch-22, where in order to build out the best technology, you need to understand from individuals what do you want folks to build. And therefore, it's this problem where, hey, unless the technology is perfect, which again, there's no such thing as perfect technology, you wind into this big kind of back and forth, and so you end up, and lawyers end up using outdated technology because it's already been vetted and it's fair. You know, that you never get fired with going with IBM, and that's what they end up going with. Here's the other thing, and this is not a bad thing. This is very normal. Some of the technology isn't the greatest, and that isn't anyone's fault when it comes to being a lawyer, but this is something that we all have to recognize as well. And so the problem that I find, especially in our industry where you kind of borrow from law, there's this idea where you can't talk about failure, and you can't talk about some things working and some things not working. Along the way, we're going to build things that aren't always the best. And we heard great examples from yesterday about how when you go through those, you learn from that and you continue forward. So this is certainly a factor as well. Another factor, obviously, is that folks can be scared of change. Now, when I say scared of change, again, this is something that I think lawyers get built up into this mythical creature. It's impossible to sell technology because they can't fathom change. They can. I'm scared of change personally, and I'm an entrepreneur. I walk the same route to work when I'm in San Francisco every day, even though I've optimized it and I've seen that I actually could take another route that might be quicker and maybe even more scenic. But that was the route that I walked the first day I moved into my new apartment, and that's the way I walk to work. And so I think it's almost unfair sometimes to only put in lawyers into this bucket where they're scared of change. However, I do still think being scared of change is one of the problems that we're facing as an industry when it comes to these new technologies. So putting a name on these problems, I hope we then can foster discussion. And obviously, to give you a little bit of what I'm going to do at the end is really a call to all of you to see and have a discussion as to how we can kind of solve or aim to solve some of these issues. This, I think, is a major factor. As lawyers, we get paid to avoid risk. So that's why people, when I was an attorney, people came to my office, hey, and what do they ask? This is what's going on in my life. This is what my business issue is. What can go wrong? And so that's what you get paid to do. That's what you learn to do. What do you do in law school? Issue spotting. That's an issue. That's an issue. That's an issue. Now the problem is when you try to go and say, hey, maybe you're doing something internally at your firm, internally at the law school, and you say, hey, let's try this new way of doing something. The problem with doing that is no one's done it before, which inherently means there's a bunch of risks, both known and unknown, that can occur. And so it almost seems we're asking individuals to change entirely what they've benefited from doing all of a sudden in this kind of new age with all these new pressures to adapt and change with legal technology. This one's the one that I think not enough people talk about when it comes to big law firms in particular. You can sell a piece of technology, or a law firm can get behind a particular piece of technology, but it has, say, 12, 19, 25 offices. Whichever practice area, or maybe it's across all practice areas your technology operates within, you're going to have to deal with different pockets and different cultures. So in effect, say that Dan is leading the Chicago office, him and his team. Dan's always been really, forward-thinking and, gung-ho about this problem. They're doing, great. But the New Orleans office, someone there just is stuck in their old ways, and it's not working out. And so one time, and we've heard this concept at these last 2 days all the time, is when we talk about law firms, we almost talk about them as one unified thing, but in reality, there are obviously different pockets, and that's an issue that we have to face. This one's a great one. Just our high level of skepticism, which again is what we get paid to do. But again, when it comes to legal innovation, entrepreneurship, or even adopting and changing with new technologies, it can be hard for individuals to get over that leap and their initial points of skepticism. And this one I don't think you can go without saying as well. There's multiple ethical considerations when it comes to the different issues facing us adopting and using technology. So when you talk about artificial intelligence, there was a question asked earlier, do you share the training between that one tool with other law firms? And where does that leave us ethically? If I use this or if I don't use this. So it's not just like you can unwrap new technology and get started using it, because there are ethical considerations that we as an industry have to go through. But the question becomes, why am I talking about this at all? I'm talking about this because I really feel that over the past 2-3 years, I've been able to travel the world and talk to all these different great innovative communities. But oftentimes we end up talking about the problems that we're facing over here when we're not actually talking about some of the problems that actually are the real source of those issues. And so what I wanted to do at this conference, because of the great lineup of folks and because of the great lineup of speakers, is actually almost come with questions myself. Asking myself, how can we change these things? And that's why I want to have a pretty spirited discussion. Because I think that we can talk about, AI, new forms of doing technology, the latest and greatest widget, but that until we deal with these cultural challenges, or at least, give them names and have conversations about them, what's going to end up is we're not actually going to be as successful as we can be. And what we may end up doing is adopting and changing in such small increments that that becomes an issue. Now, Uber was mentioned as this kind of disrupting force. And it certainly was. And one thing that I consistently have heard as an entrepreneur in this space is, Andrew, why are you working with the law firms? Why are you working with in-house teams? Why are you working with law schools? Don't you know, Andrew, that if you're really going to change this industry, you have to do what always happened. You have to go around those institutions, and you have to force them to change by inventing something outside the confines of that industry. That's what I always hear as an entrepreneur. And what I reply is, I don't think they understand that we, as a legal community, are not averse to change, et cetera, but there are going to be some challenges we have to get through to get there. And I do think that if we're really going to change our industry, the change should and has to come from within, because we're trained in a manner which I think is of a huge benefit. So when you think about those apps and those different things where folks just distribute it and get it direct to consumer, sure, some of that I think makes a lot of sense. But I do think that having lawyers at the center and solving these legal issues is what we need. So in order to solve these issues, I actually think we don't just need more technology, I think we need more lawyers. And I think those lawyers need to be equipped, and maybe they won't be getting paid, as we heard earlier, or those legal professionals, variations of that, they won't get paid the same amount of money, but they're going to be out there and solving issues. So I continuously get asked to go to different events, and obviously, I've made my name in talking about artificial intelligence, and this is a variation on the dog and the bagel issue. This is if it's a chihuahua or a muffin. Not something you want to make a mistake on. But I think what I wanted to focus on in this particular presentation is how we really shouldn't and we can talk about that. But I think I'm also excited about us sitting down and talking about process mapping, or if you're in Canada, process mapping. And I'm not getting paid by Post-it notes, but that's what I think is some of the most powerful technology is a piece of paper and a pen. And until we get it right with a piece of paper and a pen and have conversations about, okay, well, this is a new form of technology, or this is a new way of doing things. If this works out, what is going to happen? What are the consequences of it? Because it's almost like we have an issue in our industry where it's like, what if the dog catches the car? And I think we're at this point. Laura did a great job in talking about, no, there is these proof points that these systems can help us. And then rightfully so, people ask them, why isn't it all happening? Because there's these systemic issues that I think are holding that back. And once we get that right, I think things are really going to click, and we truly enter the age of the legal entrepreneur. And I think we are in that age, and it's beginning to happen because of all the change that we're hearing. And if you notice the themes and how this conference opened up to begin with, what did we open up with? Legal entrepreneurship, but culture. And I didn't know, what other individuals and what other speakers would be talking about at this conference. But as I sat over there watching everyone stand up and go, I thought, wow, this is perfect, because I think I can actually end up and tie this all together in my presentation, and this was not planned. So I think we have to let's go through what's going on. I think we have to acknowledge the fact, and it's not a bad thing, I'm not calling anyone out, but the truth is, lawyers are still using WordPerfect. The truth is, when I told the team and the engineering team at Ross Intelligence, hey, you have to optimize our platform for the oldest forms of Internet Explorer, that's a true thing. And then the question becomes, hey, but Andrew, you have this gadget, it's artificial intelligence, and it works in health, and it works in finance. It's going to do everything in law. But the point is, artificial intelligence is not going to save us from these hundreds of years of the way that we've kind of crafted our culture. And it's, again, this isn't an indictment, it's not a problem, but I think we have to talk about it, because the first step, with that, with the grief cycle, yeah, there he is, Mr. Peters, is you gotta accept that, right? And then as we heard, if we accept this, my hope is that we're gonna go through these phases a lot quicker, because entrepreneurs like Laura and her team, like what's going on, I'm gonna give a shout out to Toronto, but across the world, Singapore, Germany, Hong Kong, Australia, England, etc. There's fabulous tools being crafted right now by these entrepreneurs who wanna help, but I think we're not having enough of a conversation about the fundamental issues, and I think I wanna devote some more of my time on that. The truth is, and I think we need to stop looking at legal technology as a silver bullet that's gonna fix all of our problems. Because when you do that, you end up thinking to yourself, all of a sudden, all I have to do is get that new technology that helps me with my timekeeping, and that's gonna make me innovative. Law firm needs to be innovative. We're gonna go ahead and we're gonna trial, not purchase, this technology, and now we're innovative. A law school can appoint someone with a title about innovation, and all of a sudden, that's innovation, right? Innovation is ugly, it's hard, you get your hands dirty, and you learn. You take risks, and you work as a team. And I think what we need to realize is that, we talk about these problems that we face as a community as if it's something new. This is something that, it's not our fault, it's our time now as a community. In finance and health, these things happened just earlier. I always thought of law like the Wizard of Oz. When I was, in law school, it was all kind of this magic. And you go up to a beautiful, castle, and there's, smoke, and you say, these are my legal issues. And then all of a sudden a voice says, you have to file this, and you have to do that. And you say, okay. And then you say, what do I do now? And they say, pay X amount of dollars on the way up. And you're walking out, but what happened was the sheet has come down in many ways. And what's behind that? Same thing in The Wizard of Oz, an old white man. But that is something that's happening, and that sheet's coming down. And I think they're all interrelated, but I think to put the pressure in many ways on the legal tech community to solve legal innovation is not fair. Just like I think it's not about what do we have to do as law schools to change things. I felt bad for a lot of the folks in the faculty here over the last few days, because anytime we came up to an issue, what did we say? Law school should teach that. But I think it's a joint effort, because our issues actually, and we heard this already, and like I said, this wasn't planned, our issues have nothing to do with technology. Our issues are attitudinal, and we can change these things, and we have to see the benefit of that. But first, we have to address those issues. So you've got to ask yourself one question. What are you going to do about it? And I think it might seem kind of corny for me to ask this question, but we are at Northwestern Law School. And I'm not just saying this, it's just data, one of the best law schools in the world. We have the best legal thought leaders in this room, across many different verticals. We have innovative law schools. We have innovative in-house teams with the GC. As a matter of fact, the titles that we've heard from so far in this conference have been CEO, Executive Director, CIO, GC, Dean, Founder, CEO, Director, Co-founder, CEO, Director. That's why yesterday I wanted to make sure I was well represented. I put on a collared shirt. It's a big deal. But if we can't all figure this out, then where is it going to come from? So we can't just talk about legal innovation. We have to start doing these things, and we have to start working as a global community. So I think that an event like this is so important, because even on the live stream, this is about us being able to change everything and act as change agents individually, but on a global scale, because together we can share what works and what doesn't. What's happening in Germany is important for what's happening here. What's happening in Singapore is important for what's happening here. What's happening in Mexico is important for what's happening here. And the idea that we can live in our silos is not going to work. What's happening in Canada matters, you see? But it matters for all of us. It's not a Canada, US, Mexico, Singapore thing. It's an all thing. And so when we, in order to actually do this, have to collaborate, and we can actually suffer from the same sins as the industry we're trying to change. So what does that look like? No diversity. Okay, we got to change that. What does that look like? Attitudes where you have to be X amount of, you must be this old to ride this ride. That's already happening in legal technology, but there's still issues there too. What law school did you go to? What about this? What about that? We need to become a culture and an industry which cares about what you produce and what we're doing, and we have to hold people accountable and just say, hey, you can speak about this stuff, but let's all, how can I help you do something? The thing is, like I said, what we're doing is very important, and I feel like we all should feel very excited because, yes, there's a challenge. Yes, absolutely, a massive challenge. But we all now get to be part of this amazing community that can change the way the very course of history goes. Now, I know that I sound over the top because that's what I do. I'm an Aries. I don't know if that is even a thing. But, but here's the thing. We have gathered the world's best minds. Each one of you took time out of all your busy schedules to be here. There's no one else who cares about this stuff. So we can't just say, hey, you know what, someone else is going to do this. Someone else is going to do this. We're going to have to do this. And I think now the level of what it counts to actually be making a change in our industry has been risen. So it's not just enough to have a website with a picture of a black person, a Hispanic person, a female, etc., and say that's a diverse organization. Okay? There needs to be more there. It's not enough to just say innovation with a cool picture of a microchip on your website, and that's it. The industry and our other industries that we're serving our clients are changing, and we have to change. And like I said, we really do have to figure this out. And it doesn't mean there's a method that we might not know it. So as you can see here, this baby is really smart. And this is the fun. And this is the fun. This is the fun of innovation. This is the fun of innovation. We have to think outside of the box. When you get asked questions, what does the world look like in 5, 10 years? People ask me that. I actually don't know, because before the iPhone came out, before smartphones came out, if you met someone that would have given you spot-on predictions of technology and large technology companies in the next 5 to 10 years, the year before the iPhone came out, they would be a trillionaire, because it changed everything so fundamentally that there's no way of knowing what's going to happen. And we can all play a part in that, and each one of you come from various other communities, and you are the people who will be the folks, if you want to, cause and be part of this change. It's important we do this because there is no such thing as a magic money machine. And what I mean by that is there's no whiz-bang tool that's going to come out and solve things. The Holy Grail that we talked about earlier. This is going to cause, and you're going to have your place for the legal educators, you're going to have your place for the in-house teams, the legal entrepreneurs, the technologists. We all play a role in this, and it's not just one or the other, but we all have to learn how to play nice. Because if we're waiting for technology to save us, it won't. We have to save ourselves from some of the issues we face, but with that comes tremendous opportunity. So like I said, I wanted to have some conversation and a discussion, so I'll pause there, and thank you very much.
I think actually probably the most useful thing would be to hear from folks here, but one problem, perhaps, a money machine would be useful because you get money that you can spend on anything, right? You don't have to identify your problem before a money machine is useful.
Correct.
But before you can go after the latest technology, right? The greatest example of this is, the current example of this might be like blockchain, right? Blockchain is great, and we're going to use it for everything, right? But what is the problem that you're solving? What is the question that you're asking for which blockchain is the answer, right?
Correct.
If the question is, how do I buy a large amount of illegal drugs without being traced, then maybe blockchain is your answer.
Maybe.
But maybe.
I wouldn't know anything about that. So
I don't know anything about that either.
It seemed like you had some experience.
But if your question is, how do I track what vegetables are being grown, then maybe blockchain isn't your answer.
Correct.
So to look at the answers first before you have a good grasp on the questions, even if you're willing to accept the answers, if you don't know what they're the answer to, you're going to throw up your hands in frustration and say, this technology isn't helping me.
100%.
I adopted the technology and now it's not helping.
Exactly.
So, but identifying the problems facing an industry is a very hard challenge. That in fact, technology is not going to give us a lot of help with that problem. I mean, they're on the margins it can, but you have to have a deep understanding of the industry and a willingness to ruthlessly look at what you're doing and think about ways to improve. So that strikes me as another challenge that before technology has tremendous potential, but the most potential when it is addressing problems that we really struggle with.
And on that note, that's why I called it Post-it notes, WordPerfect Artificial Intelligence, because I think you got to start with the Post-it notes, and you got to lay out your process mapping, and you got to say, what technology works at which point. And maybe blockchain works for some things. Maybe AI works for some things. Maybe other things work for other things. But I think we get excited. But we also, I think the other thing about Post-it notes that I was trying to say is that Post-it notes also means instead of, if I'm going to go out and make a buying decision, I need to understand what I expect to happen. And if I show up at a car dealership with no intent to actually purchase a vehicle, then that doesn't make sense as well. So you can't just show up and be like, I heard that you guys have a new automobile, and show it to me and everything's going to be fixed. So I think the Post-it notes were important, and then the WordPerfect, what I meant by that is this isn't a slight on WordPerfect. I had to use it when I was an attorney. It's functional. But my point is sometimes
WordPerfect has reveal code. WordPerfect is actually great. The only problem is that they didn't keep it updated. That's a separate issue, though. We're not going to talk about that.
The WordPerfect law, we got you. But my point with WordPerfect was, look, my point wasn't, there's Google Documents or Living Documents would probably do a much better job with that. So I actually don't think we should still be using that. And then artificial intelligence marked what I was really talking about, the future of what we're up to. And so I think we can't just jump into things, and I think sometimes we do, because I think we've become, we're almost like, I'm a Toronto Maple Leafs hockey fan, and every year is the year we're going to win the Stanley Cup. And I think what we don't want to do is throw up this kind of Hail Mary shot with any technology and say, this is going to be the thing that solves everything, because it's not. And I think it does more harm than good.
And I would just make one other comment before that I'll turn it, which is, and the other issue which relates to all the points that you were making before, is that in fact, law firms already have available to them a huge amount of technology, incredibly powerful technology that is sitting on people's computers, even in the form of, say, Excel or other things.
100%.
And with no idea of how to use it.
And so Casey Flaherty, who I opened up with, I think does a really fabulous job talking about how he does technology tests for Excel and Word or whatnot. And that's an issue too. But the issue isn't the fact that we're going to go say Microsoft doesn't make sense. The issue is that the lawyers and the processes by which we distribute technology in our industry are not up to snuff and have to change. So I do think it's not about throwing out old tools. I think artificial intelligence, the analogy that I like to use is that it's a chainsaw. It's a chainsaw and you're giving it to a lumberjack. But sometimes it makes sense to use a chainsaw, but other times for a smaller tree it might not make sense. So you don't throw out your old tools based off of the new tools. And a lot of the time these new tools are doing things that those old tools weren't even doing at all. And so it's apples and oranges sometimes, and I think that's another thing when it comes to what do we do now with all this new stuff. I can't keep up to date with it. It's like, step back. What do you do in your day-to-day job?
Exactly.
Use resources. The ABA has websites. Law schools have websites. A lot of people have websites. And then I think it's a call to action to our community to ask questions about like what happens when the dog catches the car. So if this is successful, what does implementation look like, et cetera? Because it seems that we're at a point where, because one of the issues I mentioned was first time being innovative, people don't know, and lawyers are missing out on using tools that do a better job for their client overall, based off of things that are actually not necessarily just their fault. But the problem is it's no one's fault. So it's no one's fault and nothing happens.
And all those issues you talked about, the 10 points you started with, I would suggest you don't even have to look to adoptions of new technologies that entrepreneurs are bringing up. You can see that resistance as people, put things on a list instead of a spreadsheet from which they can generate a pivot table or something
have their
like that.
assistant print out emails because they won't look at emails.
Exactly. So
that happens a lot.
We certainly see that. But Mark, go ahead. Yeah.
So, first of all, Andrew, great presentation, and I especially love the fact that you, as a technologist, are stepping back and asking us to consider the larger questions, right? So some of those questions are, our culture. How are we going to change our culture? And if I hear one more, legal innovator or legal pioneer, it's really challenging my gag reflex. And I think what's important is, Sarah, you just nailed it right on the head when you said, it depends on what kinds of problems you're seeking to solve, right? And so going back a step to culture, I think what we as a profession, if we want to stay relevant, and not just be gobbled up by the industry, I think we have to ask the question, what is legal culture today? Given the new tools that are available, and given the things that we've historically done well, but clearly listening to all the static and having to, I think, be realistic about things that need a lot of improvement, like access to justice, like really low net promoter score on the part of our clients. And I think if we really want to get serious, to your point, Andrew, is I think we have to have a serious discussion about what is legal culture. And it's not just about managing partners, it's not just about people of my age, it's about the entire legal community and the entire legal ecosystem that has to have a real heart-to-heart. And so I really applaud what you're saying, and Sarah, one more time with feeling, totally agree with you, because culture is really nothing more than how do we define ourselves? Yeah. What is important to us? And these are not just buzzwords, these are things that you live by,
100%.
And so I think we really got to get serious about that.
I think what I see sometimes is because they're, it's not as dire as maybe some of the headlines, and Mark did a great job kind of describing that in terms of the change, but all industries are going through tremendous change, and I think sometimes what I see is this tendency for us to just grab whatever's around us and run outside and I'm going to go do something.
Right.
But what I'm saying is let's pause and talk to each other and come up with a plan and say, how are we going to do this and what can we work together to get this done?
Yeah, and I just have a question for you to follow up, if I may, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to take too much time. When I first saw your first slide of the money machine, my first thought was, oh, he's going to riff about sort of the current legal system, right? Because let's be honest about it, law has become a little bit of a money machine for certain people, and that's not an indictment. It's not saying they're not. I was a beneficiary of it for many, many years. But I think that one of the things we're going to have to grapple with is it's going to be very hard, because the people currently in power, whether it's a GC, whether it's a managing partner, whether frankly it's tenured faculty at a legal academy, these are the people who are the beneficiaries of what has been, and now we're talking about not disrupting the apple cart, but certainly changing it. How do you propose that we really get the people who can make the difference?
I think we have to sit down and have a conversation with them. And I feel like sometimes we don't, and I was guilty of this myself. A lot of the things that I'm talking about, I'm not saying that myself was perfect at any of this as well, but I think we just have to have venues and conversations like this, and that's why I chose to present on this topic, was so that we could have this conversation. I think it's actually not more complicated than that, because what I think happens with us, and even the way that everything works, is the folks who think one way show up at the same events, and we talk about the same things all the time, and we all get it. But how do we get more people who I haven't seen before at any of these events? Or how do we get the people who make these decisions at these firms at these events? And yeah, I know it seems like a very hard task to do. Andrew, I've been doing it for X amount of years, blah, blah, blah. But that's no reason to give up. And I do think that there are a lot of changes in the marketplace right now where clients have pushed back that we can use as a kind of a crowbar. I think artificial intelligence has been really fabulous because it actually sparked discussions of legal innovation generally. Folks now, when they talk about AI, when they talk to Ross Intelligence, they'll ask us, hey, can you build X, Y, and Z? And it has nothing to do with AI. But the fact is, artificial intelligence has led to this conversation about legal innovation in general, and I think that's been a fabulous thing. But I think, to answer your question directly, Mark, what do we do? I think obviously it's about getting people involved in the conversation, and I do think that it's the same thing we've seen, and I'm not gonna get political or anything, but just generally in society, we're more connected via our devices, et cetera, but we connect to people within our own mindset, and we have to break that, because what you have on your Twitter algorithm, where you look through, is gonna be different than someone who's not at this conference, and how do we get that same kind of alignment, and how do we get them excited about these changes? When you show someone that you can do your job better, that you can do best by your client, they want that. No one's saying they don't, but how do we deliver that message? We heard about scaring people. That happens so much with these headlines, it's here to replace everyone. That's not the case. But I think it's on all of us, and we as a community have some work to do, but I think if we're really gonna make the leap, that pattern of adoption, technology adoption, I gave a talk in Singapore not too long ago where I said we as a community are crossing the chasm. If anyone knows that analogy. We as a community are going mainstream. But if we're gonna go mainstream and actually have there's been decades of work in this field by some of the people in this room who've been working tirelessly. Right now is the most critical juncture because we as a community are crossing that chasm and we're going mainstream. And so we need to double down our efforts to ensure that we get not just the early adopters and those other individuals, but talk to what's the laggards in that curve. Because guess what? It's not going to be enough for us to push through if we don't have those folks at the table.
Right, and then just building on that as well, if you go to some people and you say, I have this really cool tool, there's a group of people, like the people in this room, who are like, that is awesome, show me the cool tool.
The winch on a sailing system, I need to go into that business.
But there are other people who you need to go to and say, you have a problem, and I want to fix your problem.
Yeah.
And later they don't want to hear about the tool. They just want to know that you can help them with the thing that they already know they're struggling.
Yeah, and they're not an idiot.
They're not an idiot. They know that they have this problem, and you're here to fix the problem. And the fact that the way you're going to fix their problem is to use a cool thing, they don't care. They just want their problem fixed.
Agreed.
So I think that's a way to, but then to do that, you have to have a good understanding of whatever it is, whether it's the law business or academia, or you have to have a good understanding of that in order to be able to talk to people about what they're actually interested in. Because not everybody, for some reason that I don't understand, but not everybody is interested in the cool computers, but they certainly are interested. I'll use an example from academia. If you can go to someone and say, I bet you've been wondering about the way this group makes decisions. And I know you've been writing about that for years.
Yeah.
And I have this different way of thinking about why this group makes decisions this way. They might be interested.
I mean, one of the greatest points of success that was pointed out by Mr. Peters earlier was when he released that magazine and people didn't know the name of it, but they knew the content and the stories within it, right? That's what we have to do. It doesn't matter if it's called artificial intelligence or predictive coding or e-discovery, et cetera. The results, and that is what we have to deliver. And we're raising our game as a company at Ross Intelligence, where we released EVA for free. That's an MVP product. We released it bare bones. People can write what they want in it and come back. And it's been interesting to see the people who get it. Some people who don't. But we as a company have been so much better for it because now we know what people actually want in that product, and now we can deliver on that. So that's the kind of attitude I think we have to do, and you have to, dare, to go over. And one thing, there was another question that was asked: how are we going to change things? Some of us in our respective communities have already been doing this, but I'm saying charge again over that hill. Take a few more arrows because that's what's going to happen. But collectively, I think we're on the verge of crossing this chasm over the next 2-3 years, and we can do it.
Dan?
Quick anecdote. At my humble law school, we have a law tech committee because I said so. It consists of a handful of faculty who are interested, and even some evangelists about law tech, administrators who are on the committee because I can make them be on the committee, and no one who's not on the law tech committee gives a shit about legal tech at law school. Yeah. From the top to the bottom. I think it's an illustration.
And you know what? That's the case that I've seen across law schools, in-house law firms, And that's one of the things we have to change. And how do we change that? I don't have the answers, but I know that when I'm in front of a room of all intelligent people like all of you, I can ask that question because I need help figuring that out too. And I think part of that is when you show up even at a law firm that seems like they're doing such innovative things, and then you realize they have no procurement process at all. I mean, these are the challenges that are out there. And you know, I feel like I've been so blessed to be part of this revolution, and it's been great, but now I feel like I want to give back by even starting these conversations, because the idea that all these young legal tech startups are going to enter into the same problems, that's nuts too. Let's make the world a better place for them, and let's make it better for our clients. You know, the example that Laura mentioned, I love. You know, we are literally living in a time where in law, and it doesn't matter about artificial intelligence. This could even be the simple act of process mapping could get better results in your practice, where clients are getting legal advice that isn't as good as they could receive from that same individual because of the practices they're implementing, and we're not all losing our minds about it. But when Mark mentions he had to go get a surgery that was life-ending, and what did he do? The idea that a doctor would say, well, actually, you know what, this whole robot arm thing, you know, that's crazy. I don't think robots should be in a surgery room. It was too much for me to really find out. And to be honest, like everyone knows I went into medicine because I don't like math or technology. You wouldn't accept that. And so, you know,
I have to accept that every single day.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to.
Sarah does as associate.
Exactly, and but here's the fun thing.
We're a pretty innovative school.
Yeah, and here's the thing. It's not all about, and I think we do us harm by just saying it's all about whatever's the latest and greatest. But that's a great way to catch someone's attention. So the fact that someone wants you to talk about blockchain, what I would say, talk to them about blockchain, and then talk to them about what you can do on an Excel spreadsheet.
Exactly.
In combination with what you can do with blockchain. You see?
Or just a
Whatever.
Excel spreadsheet.
Whatever. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
It had been compared to medicine. In the medicine, the change came mostly from outside. They were forced. Because during Obama administration, they gave us incentive in the office for the computerized. They gave some few $1,000 if you do this and this. And then they made the quality measure from the doctor. They have the report through computer. And now they are penalizing if you don't
Yes.
computerize. So it was not just market forces, it was for outside forces which brought us in.
Yeah, it was outside but still inside because they were the regulators.
Actually, don't be market forces.
Yeah. I think it was still inside in that it was regulated as such. And the thing is we have the regulation already in place. Dan mentioned earlier, you know, ethical obligations, duty to stay competent with the latest technology, duty to, you know, use the latest and best technology if it results in a better overall action for your clients. We have that. So the thing is to just say we need to add the rules, I think, is not necessarily just, we already have rules in place as well.
So talking about the culture, I mean, what the heck?
I'm glad I inspired that attitude. That's what I want.
No, I guess I'll just go
Let's talk
ahead.
about it.
So talking about the culture, if you look, for example, at the ABA, right, or for law schools, the AALS. These are our regulating organizations who are, all kinds of, the ABA is better than the AALS, but there's all kinds of improvements that could be made from their end through just being more serious about data. I mean, forget about, you know, and we don't see that from there, and that's like top-down cultures.
Correct.
You know, if you have a directory of lawyers that still isn't online, you can only get in a book, like what's happening, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think part of that though
That's
is
true. That's a true story.
So what we can do though, is say, well, they don't get it, and that's the way it is, and obviously we all have that frustration. But I think the onus double downs on us to figure out what to do, because, and I know a lot of people in this room have been doing it for quite some time, and you may say, hey, Andrew, you're young, you don't really get it, and maybe I don't get it, maybe I don't, but saying that means that nothing's ever going to change, and is that what we want in our culture and in law? Is that what we want? Andrew, you don't get it? I've been doing it for 20 years, just doesn't work that way? Sounds a lot like the people you say don't get you.
Can I just build on what you said, Andrew, about people not necessarily in your Twitter feed? We have to go outside our silos and tie that to regulation. Really,
to understanding the profound changes affecting our government and the fact that some of those rules should be considered, in my opinion, changed to support innovation. They're not going to be accessing any Twitter feeds. It is going to our respective state Supreme Courts one by one and sitting down and educating them. And it's a laborious task, but technology, they're not on.
I agree with you completely, and I'll use an anecdote because it also allows me to speak highly of Canada, which I love to do. I'm like the opposite of a Canadian because I'm very vocal about it. But if you look at AI in Canada and that development, our Prime Minister, there's pros and cons to anyone. There's pros and cons to what he does. But one thing is, if you ask about artificial intelligence, and there's tapes online where you can look it up, type in Justin Trudeau explains machine learning. And even if he's reading off a cue card, which I don't think he is, I actually think he understands it. He can describe what it is more or less in a very informed, unique, everyday language, which means you'll really get it. Now,
Trump can do that.
yeah, well, here's the thing. Part of that wasn't just that happening. The Canadian culture around that informed it, and academics sat down with him. He visited institutions. They made sure that he was aware of it, et cetera. So, like you said, it's a lot of work to get to that point. But the ABA or whatever, everyone here knows more about the regulatory framework that has to change than I. I'm just a legal entrepreneur I like neat, new, cool things that help people do their life better. Been doing that since I was a kid. I used to sell lemonade on hot days because I figured people wanted to cool down, right? So this is what I've been doing my whole life. I don't know about that stuff, but what I do know is that in order for us to have an overall, and us to have a successful crossing of this chasm as a community, things have to change.
Leslie?
Sometimes I wonder whether the people the students that get attracted to a JD program are the same kind of people that can innovate. I'm not saying,
Sure.
Exactly. I'm just saying there's a couple things I noticed. For example, the students that get attracted to the JD program tend to be cerebral and careful and thoughtful. And you talked in your presentation about getting stuff out there that isn't perfect, that isn't, just
iterating
from there. Those things sometimes conflict.
I agree.
And I'm not sure you can take that group of people who find comfort and safety in being thorough and
Sure.
careful and turn them into people who are going to put something out in the world that know kind of stuff.
I'm not advocating for everyone to become a legal entrepreneur. I'm advocating for us to provide in some way, not at just the law school level, but throughout their career, an ability for them to be able to have a critical mind to try new tools to do their job better, which is if they truly are so thorough, then why aren't they trying these tools out? Because they want to be so much more accurate, right? And here's the other issue is, space travel and rocket science seems pretty complex to me. I don't get it. I know that probably a bunch of fuel ignited there. I don't know how a car really works either. But I think that that's super important. Rocket science seems important. And Elon Musk put a tape on the internet of, hey, look at all the time that these rockets failed and they cost so much money along what he was doing. And so that has caused a lot of people in that industry to think he's a bit nuts. And I don't think I actually think he's nuts as well, and I'm an entrepreneur. But I don't need everyone to be an Elon Musk. That's what I'm not saying. And that's why anything in absolutes, everyone should learn how to code. Everyone should, I stay away from that. But I do think we need to foster a culture where they're not penalized for doing something that isn't what they've been taught 20 years ago.
And I would just add one other thing to that with it. It's a little bit, right now, somebody who has an entrepreneurial spirit or who is very interested in computer science might look at law and think, that's not a good field for me.
Yeah.
But as the field changes, people who are entrepreneurial, into computer science, into data, will look at law and say, I can do great things there. So right now, part of what's going on is a pipeline problem.
Yes.
Where we don't have enough people coming into law school who have this skill set. As the culture of the practice changes, I think we're going to see an improvement in that pipeline problem, and then that's going to accelerate the change in the culture.
Can we get a high five on that one?
Absolutely.
Because, and we're gonna go to a question, but I wanna say something on that. You know, what's the old saying? You become most like the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? And so include in those 5 people someone that you want to change if you can. And it's not gonna be easy, but it's something we all have to do. And I think the pipeline problem's huge. And you know, the pipeline problem's also, you know, when I said legal technology, sometimes in the past, and it will continue in the future, isn't always the greatest. I think that's been a pipeline problem too, because how do you convince an engineer to come into the legal world when they see all these issues and they're like, why would anyone want to build technology for these people who are behaving and acting in this manner?
Let me just, so that we don't run into time, let me just do this. We'll answer your
need-
question.
yeah.
I'm going to exercise my prerogative as the MC. Why don't we ask Marcus and Laura to please come down and let's continue this conversation.
Yeah, but let's get that
After
question.
we get to that
Okay.
question, yeah.
Well, and actually, I'm gonna change a tiny bit what I was gonna ask for, say, Russ.
You're iterating. You're iterating.
About the law students and who's attracted to law school. I mean, I think I'm a good example. I graduated in 1991, before there really even was legal tech. My friends all thought I was crazy because I left my big firm job after a year and a half to go in with friends of mine at a technology company and become
Marcus and Laura.
both the GC of that company, but also a process consultant. And so I'm a perfect example of someone everyone would have thought was super risk averse, but took huge risks, and that has been great for my career actually as an attorney. But what I was going to initially say is I think it's important to kind of end with your point about solving solutions and process mapping. To me, what would help us bridge the chasm is for regulatory changes, for educational changes that really foster that if you're going to be the managing partner of a law firm, or you're going to be the general counsel of a large corporation, that you have to actually go through process mapping exercises, that you have to understand how your department or your firm really works from a legal process standpoint, because then you would actually understand the problems that you needed technology to help you address. Without having that background in process mapping and understand how people and process tie into technology, you're never going to be the kind of leader of your department or your firm that can jump over the chasm that we're talking about.
I totally agree, and that's why anyone in this room talking about all of us have to take action. You know, send an email to Eva, ask about if she has programs about process mapping, design thinking. You know, that's the thing. One thing I always say, even at Ross, being CEO is mainly just me trying to problem solve all the time. And what I always hear is, well, it's not so-and-so or that particular group's issue, it's this issue that needs to change or whatnot. And so what I always suggest is that's true, because the regulatory framework is absolutely true. But then what I always ask is, what can you as an individual or your division do that can further that issue as well? So it's like, well, I'm going to send an email to Eva and do that, plus I'm going to email the regulators, whatever that is. And that's what I think we need to adopt.